Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. You can find him on Twitter at HMacB, his website, MacBethMcLeodPartners.com. Welcome back to the show, Hilliard.
Always nice to be on the show.
Hilliard, we got a notice here that energy stocks are down 19% since their high in June. What's that doing to the Alberta economy?
Well, it's hard to say, just in a couple of months, what the impact is, because the Alberta economy is still suffering from what happened 4 or 5 years ago. I guess now it's actually 7 years ago when the OPEC meeting in December of 2014, almost 7 years, caused the oil price to decline, and Alberta went through several years of decline. And then in 2020, Alberta had the worst performance of any province of minus 8% on GDP. Normally in a really bad recession, GDP goes down 2 or 3%. But it was minus 8% in Alberta, and the Canadian number would be less dramatic than that, although it would still be substantial. So a couple of months isn't going to really, but there had been an optimism that was building in Alberta. Rigs were moving back to Alberta. They'd moved to the U.S. or they'd just been just been dismantled. They were lying on the ground in yards, and now they're starting up again. And the stock prices of the energy stocks had recovered to a degree, but interestingly, they haven't really taken off, even though the price of oil has gone from less than $10 to $71 over the last 12 months. And of course, that is because people are concerned about the longer term outlook. The more and more growing sentiment against fossil fuel, burning of fossil fuels, and it's the big meetings coming up in November this year of the Glasgow meeting, which will announce, all the countries have to announce their targets to reduce their emissions, and Canada has no chance of reducing its emissions to its target. It's already been announced, never mind the revised one, unless Alberta's fossil fuel production is reduced dramatically, and that means oil sands. So it's just sort of good. People go back and forth between optimism and pessimism, and I think that's people in Alberta are used to. There's always another boom just around the corner, but this time it feels maybe there won't be another boom.
Well, we do need alternatives. We do live in the world's second coldest nation. We do need reliable energy to stay warm. Is any consideration given to that, and are there bright spots there?
Well, the coal-fired electricity generation is being switched over. I think the last plants that use coal are slated to be done by the end of this year to natural gas. So that's still a fossil fuel, and some people say it's not much of an improvement from coal. It's obviously,
obviously they've never lived in a coal-fired plant valley.
Well, there's concerns, but coal is considered a transition fuel, but the eventual goal is to go 100% renewable. And, of course, the problem with that is you've got to heat the buildings, the homes and the buildings, and it's really hard to heat without using natural gas. Electricity alone, if you had to do it, would be way too expensive. And there wouldn't probably be in the coldest days, there wouldn't be enough electricity. So one alternative is what they call ground source heat pumps. And because if you go down a few meters into the ground, maybe 5 or 10 meters, the temperature is the same year round. So what you can do is put pipes down there, have a water glycol mixture circulating in there. So in the winter you get, and the average temperature is somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius. So you get this heat from the ground. It's not particularly hot, but it's hot enough. And then what do you need for the home? 21, 22 degrees. So you just apply a little bit of heat to it with electricity, and you've got your warmth. And in the summer, the air conditioning would be great because you wouldn't have to hardly spend any money at all to bring the temperature of the house down. So, but that requires the switching from natural gas to electricity, and some people are very nervous about that.
Well, Ontario's power bills skyrocketed $700-800 a month when they switched to all electricity.
Yeah, there was, that was around the time that we had the I call it getting Enron. So Enron opened up an office in Calgary, and then they convinced, but not just Enron, but other people convinced the Alberta government to deregulate the electricity industry. I'm not familiar with the details of the Ontario experiment, but in Alberta it was very difficult because what happens is it's so easy for the participants to game the system. So they make almost all of their money at the peak times, and so what they want to do is sell electricity sometimes a day ahead, usually a day ahead, sometimes just 5 minutes ahead, at the highest price possible. And so Enron, before they got collapsed and several people went to jail, they were found to have shut down plants at critical moments in the U.S. in order to get the shortage of electricity so that the price would skyrocket. And so that there would have been some of that, I think, in Ontario, and certainly we experienced some of that in Alberta after deregulation. So it's probably not a long-term problem. It's a kind of problem that can be handled. But the issue with converting to 100% renewables, of course, in a cold climate, is that you don't always have sunshine, and you don't always, especially in the winter, and you don't always have the wind doesn't blow either. So you need some special kinds of storage to get through those tough times.
Are there any promising things? I think it's in Denmark, they use solar energy to pump water to a reservoir uphill, and then that reservoir acts as a giant battery, and they get electricity from it overnight. Do we have any developments like that happening?
So the biggest storage in the world, as has been for decades, is what they call pumped hydro, which is what you're describing. So some hydroelectric installations have a system where they can reverse the fall of the waterfall by using electricity that's surplus, and get the water to go back up to an upper reservoir, and then reverse it when they need electricity by having the water fall back down again, and hit a turbine, spin the turbine and make electricity. So it's called the pumped hydro system, and there's lots of opportunity for it, although I don't think much is being done in Canada right now. And then I ran across a new one today, which was it's called an iron air battery, which takes in oxygen, converts the iron inside the battery to rust, and I didn't realize that you could convert it back to iron again. So they basically use this conversion from iron to rust and then back to iron again as a way of storing electricity. And they've got it, and if this is correct, the company's called Form Energy. I don't know anything about it as an investment, so I'm not recommending it at all, but they're claiming that they have a 100-hour battery. So 100 hours is basically would cover 99.9% of the issues in terms of intermittence with sun and wind. And they're claiming also that it's extremely cheap. So the problem with lithium-ion batteries, which Tesla makes a power pack for utility-sized power plants, like they installed one in Australia, but it's expensive to do it with lithium-ion batteries. And so the pumped hydro is a better solution, but this one here, this new one, this 100-hour storage battery would be even better because you don't need, like pumped hydro needs a high vertical height of elevation, and it needs a reservoir at the bottom, a reservoir at the top. It's fairly complicated. It takes about 4 or 5 years to build a new plant. And there are a few being constructed right now But this new idea, and maybe other ideas that might come along, are much lower cost, and they can be implemented much more quickly. So we need, people don't want to invest in a pumped hydro system where they have to spend about $500 million to make a plant and then wait 4 or 5 years before they get any revenue back. And the risk, of course, is that in the meantime, somebody comes along with some other method of storage which is much cheaper, and their pumped hydro system never delivers a return. So that's the main thing that's holding back renewable energies, especially in the colder climate, but really everywhere, is the problem of the intermittence and the need to store the energy.
Sure. Or even if you had, say, a natural gas turbine turning at constant speed, it's most efficient. You could use that to be storing up that battery and be causing very little pollution doing it.
Yeah, the peaker plants, the natural gas. So the advantage of the natural gas plants is you can turn it on and it's producing electricity within a few moments. It heats up the water, makes it into steam, and the steam turns the turbine, and away you go. And they're called peaker plants, and they're quite common all over the world, I think. But they're only turned on infrequently, so they have to be guaranteed that they're going to be able to sell electricity at a high price for a few hours a day, fairly often, or else the cost of constructing the plant would never be recovered.
Now, of course, there's all this pressure on Canada to meet these goals, the world's second coldest nation with more natural gas than we know what to do with. Meanwhile, China is still using coal-fired plants. China apparently produces more greenhouse gas than North America and Europe combined. Wouldn't it make a lot of sense for us to get our natural gas to China to get their pollution levels down?
Well, it wouldn't make that, the purist environmentalists don't see a big difference between coal and natural gas. Obviously there's an advantage of natural gas over coal, but they would like to eliminate it altogether. And, China is the world leader in solar and wind, so by quite a wide margin. So they produce 80-90% of all the solar panels in the world. They have installed massive amounts of solar and wind in their own economy. It's just that they've got 1.2 billion people, so they're going to be producing more greenhouse gas emissions just because of that. But per capita, they produce way less than North America and Europe, and also cumulatively. So what matters with the CO2 in the atmosphere is it's cumulative. So cumulatively, the biggest offenders are the developed countries, U.S. and Canada, Australia, being three of the biggest in the world in terms of the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions per capita that they produce. So China and India are really, really low per capita compared to the more developed world. So that discussion is going to come up in Glasgow in November, but you can't just put it all onto China. I think you have to say that everybody has to do their part.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, what's going on with real estate in Alberta?
Well, there was a little surge. We didn't have the surge like Toronto had, where prices went up 20% on the houses that sold. Of course, that's somewhat distorted by the fact that there was a shortage of housing available for sale. So you got quite a surge in transactions compared to a year ago. But it was also skewed to the houses, because everybody during COVID didn't want to live in a 500 square foot condo. They wanted to live in a house with some room. So, but in Alberta, it was a mild version of that. So I think the last number we saw, we published this every month on our Twitter feed. We put out a graph, and we don't have Edmonton and Calgary specifically on there, but I recall that the number for Edmonton and Calgary is around 5% year-over-year update. But just anecdotally, and it's totally just from observation around Edmonton where I live, there are a large number of listings. So anything listed below about 700,000 or 800,000 sells very quickly. But all the stuff, sort of 900,000 and up, is just sitting on the market, and that's because it's not a hotbed for speculation in real estate, and the jobs are still. People are still worried about if they have a job or not. I think the lenders have been pretty easy to get along with in terms of not being too strict on employment, situations and that sort of thing. But the people themselves have been reluctant. But there had been a real surge in. We won't know for a few more months, but the last census, which was 2016, 5 years ago, they showed that people. Under the age of 30 or something in that range, most of them were still living at home. And anecdotally, now they say after COVID that a lot of them have moved out of their parents' basements to homes. So, now this is totally just my idea, but I've had this vision of everybody locked down, and the parents going to the kids and saying, "We don't care what it takes, just." We want you to move out, whatever. So the kids say, well, we need a down payment and we need you to co-sign the mortgage. Say, whatever, we'll do it. Where do we sign? just to end the situation where they're all jammed together in the home. But I don't know if there's any truth to that, but something happened. There was a real surge, and in Edmonton and Calgary as well. But the prices are still much cheaper than Toronto and Vancouver, of course.
Now, of course, your book is How to Survive When the Bubble Bursts in Canada with Real Estate. Vancouver and Toronto, are we going to see market collapses?
Well, the bubble bursting, the definition is that, according to experts that I researched, the definition is the prices have to revert to the trend line that was in place before the bubble started to form. So, if you take the bubble starting to form around 2003, 2004, when the big upsurge started, looking on the graph, the prices have to come down, with this latest surge included, the prices from this level have to come down about 50%. If you assume that the house prices otherwise would have grown, say, at the rate of GDP growth, 2 or 3% a year, something like that. So in 15, 20 years, prices might be up 30%. And instead they're up 200%, right? So they have to come down a lot to meet that definition. So whatever happens, I'm not quite sure, but I think, the Bank of Canada just put out a report a couple of days ago indicating there's never been so many people that are stretching, to dangerous levels of debt in relation to their income, to buy houses before. So there's a whole, I don't know, there's 12, 13 million households in Canada, 38 million people. So 12 or 13 households, about 8 or 9 million of them are owned, where they own their own, live in the accommodation that they own. Of those 8 or 9 million households, if you take the Bank of Canada reports, probably at least 1 million of them are kind of on the edge of needing help if something happens. So that alone would trigger a very massive bursting of the bubble if those people, even a quarter of them, got into trouble. 250,000 households, depending on if it's concentrated or spread, it would probably be concentrated more in Toronto and Vancouver, would have a huge impact on the market, because you can't just all of a sudden go out and find a whole bunch of new people to start buying houses, especially when prices are dropping. All the speculators disappear immediately. And all you've got left are regular people that want to buy to live in the place. And if they don't have the incomes, then they don't buy. And of course, during a downturn, or just call it during a bursting of the bubble, let's say, real estate is, if you include everything, if you include all of the activities related to real estate, it's a huge percentage of GDP. It's something like 10 to 15%, depending on the definition of real estate and related activities. So it would have a major impact on on the economy. Just for example, 10% of GDP right now, the highest ever, is going into what they call residential real estate investment. And in the U.S., it peaked at 6%, went all the way down to 2%. So if we followed that, in the bursting of a bubble, if we followed that, 10% would have to go down to 3 or 4%. That's a 6% drop in GDP alone, just from the investment segment. And that would be devastating. The normal GDP decline in a severe recession is 2 or 3 or 4%.
Affordable housing. Should the government be involved? We didn't have homeless people in Canada until Jean Chrétien decided that the federal government would no longer fund social housing. Does the government have to play a bigger role here? Because I don't think Canadians really think we should be a nation that has hundreds of thousands of homeless people.
Well, I think that's right. I think so it started a little bit before Chrétien. It started actually with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, sort of around the late 70s, early 80s. And the mantra was, let the private sector solve the problem. And so they stopped. Like in Great Britain, they were spending huge amounts of money on housing. And Thatcher privatized she sold off all the council houses and she privatized the whole industry. And of course that was the start of a major housing boom. And the same thing in the US, and in Canada followed suit. So the private sector though decided to build a certain type of housing that was most profitable. And it worked great for some people, but it didn't work for everybody. So the question now is, should the government get back into the business of providing housing? And I think the answer is it has to. There's no way there's things where developers have to do 10% of the project has to be in what they call affordable housing. If you look up the definition of affordable housing, it's where the rent is 10% lower than the market rate. Well, that's hardly affordable for a lot of people. So the alternative is, and there were lots of problems back in the 60s and 70s when they were doing this. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but at some point I think the government has to build a bunch of affordable housing, and the politics of that are extremely difficult. So I don't know when it's going to happen, but I suspect at the end it'll have to happen.
Well, it's very unpleasant to see homeless people who are forced to live in tents and parks being clubbed over the head by police.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, people get upset about that, but then you say, okay, we're going to put an affordable housing 200-unit apartment right in the middle of your nice neighborhood, and they go, "Whoa, wait a minute! I didn't mean move them all into my neighborhood. That's not what I meant. That isn't what I. So it's interesting. It's going to be a challenge, but obviously something's going to have to be done. And with housing prices having basically tripled in the last 20 years, there's a huge number of people. Unless wages all of a sudden were to jump higher, and that may happen, but it's unlikely. If wages don't jump higher, substantially higher, I'm talking about doubling in the wages. The unaffordability in Canada is just off the charts. It's probably the worst in the world, and it isn't just in it's not like San Francisco and Hong Kong. It's like the average town. The average town in the U.S., the house prices are a tiny fraction of what they are in Canada, and that's where a lot of people. People need to find jobs, and they need to live, and they need to raise a family and do all that stuff. And they can't be going around spending $800,000 or $900,000 on a house if their incomes are under $100,000. That just doesn't work. So something has to be done.
Hilliard, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Nice to be on your show again.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. His website, MacBethMcLeodPartners.com. Find him on Twitter at HMacB. If you have any questions for Hilliard or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@HowStreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at talkdigitalnetwork.com. HowStreet.com Radio is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.